Hello everyone, welcome to the channel. Before we start today's case, I want to ask for your support by subscribing to my channel. Your support is very important to me, so please subscribe to follow more cases and encourage us. Click the like button and let's get into the case. The morning light spilled across Hanalei Bay like liquid gold, painting the water's surface in shimmering amber hues that masked the depths below. Tyler Morgan stood at the edge of the beach, his weathered surfboard tucked under his arm, watching as the early waves rolled in with promising height. At 27, Tyler had been surfing since he was old enough to stand on a board, his California upbringing giving way to a nomadic adulthood that followed the best waves around the world. Kauai had been his home for the past 18 months, longer than he'd stayed anywhere since leaving his parents' San Diego home at 19. The bay stretched before him in a perfect half-moon of white sand and turquoise water, backed by the dramatic green mountains that made Hanalei one of the most photographed locations in Hawaii. This early, just after 6 a.m., the beach was nearly empty save for a few dedicated locals who nodded in silent acknowledgement as Tyler made his way toward his usual spot. He recognized Kai, an old Hawaiian man who had been fishing these waters for over 60 years, setting up his gear near the pier. "Hey, haole boy," Kai called out, using the term for non-natives that had long since lost its sting between them. Water stayed choppy today, big tiger seen yesterday by the boat tours. Tyler raised a hand in acknowledgement but didn't slow his pace. Tiger sharks weren't uncommon in Hawaiian waters, especially during this time of year when the water temperature was perfect for both surfers and the marine life that attracted predators. He'd heard similar warnings before, and while he respected the ocean and its inhabitants, fear had never been part of his relationship with the water. "Thanks for the heads up," he called back, his board shorts hanging low on his hips as he adjusted the leash around his ankle. "I'll keep my eyes open." Kai shook his head, the deeply etched lines of his face expressing disapproval more clearly than words. "Not worth it today, boy. This one big. 15 feet maybe. Makau whale. Frightening." Tyler knew enough Hawaiian to understand, but he smiled anyway, the confidence of youth and experience overriding the old man's concern. "Just a quick session. The waves are too good to pass up." The truth was, Tyler needed this. His job at the local dive shop barely covered rent on his small apartment in Princeville, and a recent breakup with Leilani, a local girl whose family had been less than thrilled about their relationship, had left him feeling untethered. The ocean had always been his solace, the one constant in a life marked by movement and impermanence. As he paddled out beyond the break, Tyler felt the familiar rush of adrenaline that came with being alone in the vastness of the Pacific. The water beneath him was a deep, rich blue, clear enough to see perhaps 20 feet down before it faded into mysterious darkness. The waves were indeed good, 6 to 8 feet, with clean faces, perfect for the long rides Hanalei was famous for. He caught several in quick succession, each ride better than the last, carving smooth turns across the wave faces while water sprayed from the edge of his board. It was during a lull between sets when he first noticed the strange feeling. Tyler had been surfing long enough to develop what some called a shark sense, an awareness of the water that extended beyond simple sight and sound. Something felt off. The usual rhythm of the ocean seemed disrupted, and he noticed that the handful of other early morning surfers who had joined him had begun to move closer to shore. Treading water beside his board, Tyler scanned the horizon, seeing the distinctive red flag that now flew from the lifeguard stand that had been empty when he'd first entered the water. The flag was new today. He'd been out yesterday evening for a sunset session, and there had been no warnings then. As he watched, a lifeguard with a bullhorn appeared, his voice carrying across the water. "Attention all swimmers and surfers. Please exit the water immediately. There have been multiple shark sightings in the bay this morning." Most of the other surfers were already paddling in, but Tyler hesitated. The waves were continuing to build with the incoming tide, and he just caught sight of a large set forming on the horizon. Perfect A-frames, the kind that made for magazine covers and video highlights. Just one more, he thought. One more good ride before calling it quits. He began paddling toward the incoming set, ignoring the distant shouts from shore. At 27, Tyler had survived wipeouts in Pipeline, close encounters with reef sharks in Tahiti, and a particularly harrowing experience during a storm in southern Mexico. One more wave with a tiger shark somewhere in the vicinity seemed like an acceptable risk. The first wave of the set rolled under him, too steep for a good entry. He let it pass, his eyes on the second wave building behind it. This one looked perfect, a clean face, with just enough power to make it interesting without being dangerous. Tyler turned his board toward shore, began paddling hard, and felt the familiar surge as the wave caught him and pushed him forward. He popped up to his feet in one fluid motion, finding the sweet spot on the board and beginning his descent down the face of the wave. It was a glorious ride, perhaps the best of the morning. Tyler carved a smooth bottom turn, then climbed back up the face, his right hand trailing through the water as he felt the unique combination of speed and stillness that only surfing could provide. For a moment, everything else disappeared. The boar, warnings, the red flag, the other surfers paddling to shore. There was only Tyler, the board beneath his feet, and the perfect wave carrying him through the crystalline waters of Hanalei Bay. He was so caught in the euphoria of the ride that he almost missed it, a massive shadow moving beneath the surface, darker than the water around it, shaped like a torpedo and moving with deliberate purpose. Tyler's heart slammed against his ribs as his brain processed what his eyes were seeing. The shadow was easily 15 feet long, just as Kai had warned, its broad head and distinctive shape unmistakable even through the distortion of the water. Tiger. Shark? Not just any tiger shark, but one of the largest he'd ever seen, its girth suggesting a weight of well over 1,000 pounds. And it was changing direction, turning toward him with the preternatural awareness that had made sharks the ocean's perfect predators for millions of years. Time seemed to slow down. Tyler was still riding the wave, still moving at considerable speed toward the shore, but he knew he wouldn't make it all the way in before the wave lost its power. He'd have to paddle the rest of the way, vulnerable and exposed in deeper water. The decision came automatically, born from years of experience and countless ocean safety courses. Stay on the board, make yourself look bigger, don't splash, don't panic, paddle smoothly but firmly toward shore. The wave began to lose its shape, transforming from a clean wall to a tumbling mass of white water. Tyler stayed upright as long as possible, squeezing every possible yard out of the ride before dropping to his stomach and beginning to paddle. He didn't look down. He didn't need to. He could feel the massive predator's presence, an electric awareness that crawled across his skin like static. He was perhaps 200 yards from shore when he felt it, a subtle pressure change in the water, as if something large was displacing the space beneath him. Every instinct screamed for him to paddle faster, but rational thought prevailed. Rapid splashing movements would only trigger the predatory response. Smooth, deliberate strokes. Keep moving. Don't show fear. The lifeguard's bullhorn sounded again, though Tyler couldn't make out the words over the rushing of blood in his ears. He risked a quick glance toward shore and saw several people pointing in his direction, their faces showing the alarm he was trying desperately not to feel. Then came the bump. A gentle nudge at first, almost curious, as the massive shark made initial contact with the underside of his board. The bump lifted Tyler several inches out of the water, a demonstration of the creature's immense power even in its most casual movement. He held his breath, still paddling, still moving toward shore now less than 150 yards away. The second bump was harder, less exploratory and more purposeful. The shark was testing him, trying to determine if he was prey. Tyler's board tilted precariously, and he had to grip the edges to avoid being thrown into the water. "Please," he whispered, though he wasn't sure who or what he was addressing. The shark, the ocean, some higher power that might be listening. "Please, just let me get to shore." The third contact wasn't a bump. It was an attack. The massive tiger shark surged upward from below, its powerful jaws closing around the back third of Tyler's surfboard with a force that shattered the fiberglass and foam like it was made of paper. The sound was unlike anything Tyler had ever heard, a combination of splintering material and the peculiar underwater thunder of a large animal moving at high speed. The impact launched Tyler forward, separating him from what remained of his board as he plunged into the water. Instinctively, he curled into a ball, trying to minimize his surface area, as panic finally overwhelmed his training. He was in the water with one of the ocean's apex predators, a creature perfectly evolved to kill, with no protection and no clear path to safety. Time fragmented into a series of disjointed, hyper-real moments. The shocking cold of the water against his skin, the absolute clarity with which he could see his own arms as he tried to orient himself, the distant shouts from shore that sounded like they were coming through layers of thick glass, and then pain. Extraordinary blinding pain that shot through his left leg like electricity as the tiger shark made a second pass, this time connecting with flesh instead of fiberglass. Tyler felt the unmistakable pressure of teeth sinking into his calf and thigh, the serrated edges slicing through muscle and tendon with mechanical efficiency. In that moment, Tyler Morgan was sure he was going to die. The knowledge came with surprising clarity, a simple fact rather than a fear. He'd ignored the warnings, he'd stayed out for one wave too many, and now, in the perfect waters of Hanalei Bay, he would become another statistic, another cautionary tale for future surfers. But then, as suddenly as it had begun, the pressure released. The shark had let go, perhaps unsatisfied with the taste of human flesh, or distracted by the commotion now visible in the water as a rescue boat roared toward them from the direction of the pier. Tyler broke the surface, gasping for air, his leg trailing blood that spread through the water in a diffuse cloud. The boat was close now, perhaps 30 yards away, its outboard motor growling as it cut through the small chop. He tried to wave but found his strength evaporating with alarming speed. Shock, he realized dimly. I'm going into shock. The water around him was turning from turquoise to pink, the blood loss more significant than he'd initially realized. Tyler tried to stay afloat, but his wounded leg was useless, and the adrenaline that had initially masked the worst of the pain was beginning to fade, leaving him weak and disoriented. Just as his vision began to narrow, strong hands reached down from the boat, grabbing his arms and shoulders, hauling him from the water with urgent efficiency. He caught a glimpse of familiar faces, two of the local lifeguards he'd gotten to know during his time in Hanalei, before the pain overwhelmed him and he slipped into unconsciousness. Tyler awoke to the rhythmic beeping of hospital monitors and the antiseptic smell that seemed universal to medical facilities around the world. He blinked slowly, his mouth bone dry, his thoughts fuzzy around the edges in a way that suggested serious painkillers. A face swam into view, a woman in her 40s with warm brown eyes and a blue surgical cap. "Welcome back, Mr. Morgan," she said, checking one of the monitors beside his bed. "I'm Dr. Patel. You're at Wilcox Medical Center in Lihue. Do you remember what happened?" The memories came back in a rush. The perfect wave, the massive shadow, the shattering impact as the tiger shark destroyed his board, the unimaginable pain as it took hold of his leg. Tyler tried to sit up, suddenly desperate to see the damage, but a firm hand on his shoulder kept him in place. "Easy," Dr. Patel said. "You've just come out of surgery, and we need you to stay still. You've lost a lot of blood." "My leg?" Tyler managed, his voice a rasp. Dr. Patel's expression was professional, but kind. "We were able to save it. The shark's teeth caused significant damage to your calf muscle and severed several tendons, but fortunately it missed the major arteries. You'll need extensive physical therapy, and there will be scarring, but with time and effort, you should regain most of your functionality." Relief washed over Tyler like a wave, bringing unexpected tears to his eyes. He hadn't realized until that moment how certain he'd been that he'd lost the limb entirely. "The others?" he asked. "Was anyone else hurt?" "No," Dr. Patel assured him. "You were the only one still out in the water when the shark attacked. The lifeguards had called everyone else in." The pointed observation wasn't lost on Tyler, but Dr. Patel didn't press the issue. Instead, she checked his IV line and made a note on the tablet she carried. "You have some visitors waiting. The lifeguards who pulled you out and an older Hawaiian gentleman who says he warned you about the shark. Should I send them in? Just for a few minutes." Tyler nodded, and Dr. Patel left the room, returning. Moments later with 3 men, the 2 lifeguards, Makoa and Jesse, whose quick action had saved his life, and Kai, who looked concerned despite the clear "I told you so" written across his weathered features. Haole boy," Kai said, his voice gruff with emotion. "You listen next time, yeah?" "Yes, sir," Tyler responded, genuine remorse in his voice. "I should have headed in when you warned me." Makoa, the senior lifeguard, a native Hawaiian with 20 years of experience on Kauai's beaches, stepped forward. "You're lucky to be alive, bruh. That tiger was one of the biggest I've seen in 30 years of swimming these waters." "We've contacted the Department of Land and Natural Resources," Jesse added. He was younger than Makoa, maybe in his early 30s, with the deep tan of someone who spent his life on the water. They're sending a team to track the shark and monitor its movements. The bay is closed to swimming. Until further notice. Tyler absorbed this information with a growing sense of guilt. His recklessness had not only nearly cost him his life, but had now disrupted the livelihoods of those who depended on the bay for fishing, tourism, and recreation. "I'm sorry," he said simply. "I should have known better." Kai made a dismissive gesture with his hand. "What's done is done. The shark was just being shark. You were just being stubborn howly, both of you doing what comes natural." Despite everything, Tyler found himself smiling at the old man's blunt assessment. Will they try to kill it?" "No," Makoa said firmly. "That's not how we do things here. The shark was in its natural environment, doing what sharks do. We'll track it, warn people, close beaches if necessary, but the days of hunting down sharks after attacks are over. We respect the ocean and its creatures, even when they remind us of our place in the natural order." This response eased some of Tyler's concern. He'd developed a deep respect for Hawaiian culture during his time on the island, and the balanced approach to the shark attack aligned with the values he'd come to appreciate. A nurse appeared at the door, signaling that visiting time was over. As his visitors prepared to leave, Kai lingered for a moment. "The fishermen, we have a saying, the ocean doesn't want you dead, but it doesn't particularly want you alive either. Remember that next time, eh?" With that pearl of wisdom, he followed the others out, leaving Tyler alone with his thoughts and the steady beeping of the monitors. The next few days passed in a blur of medical procedures, pain management, and brief visits from the few friends Tyler had made during his time on Kauai. His parents called from California, frantic after seeing the story on the national news. Surfer survives massive tiger shark attack in Hawaii, and offered to fly out immediately. Tyler declined, partly out of a desire not to worry them further, and partly from embarrassment at having to explain how he'd ignored multiple warnings before the attack. On the third day, as Tyler was learning to maneuver himself from bed to a wheelchair with his heavily bandaged leg extended before him, he received an unexpected visitor. Detective Michael Larson of the Kauai Police Department was a tall, lean man with the perpetually sun-reddened complexion of a mainlander who had moved to the islands in adulthood. "Mr. Morgan," Larson said, pulling a chair beside Tyler's bed. After introducing himself, "I hope you're feeling better. I have some questions about the incident if you're up to answering them." Tyler adjusted himself in the hospital bed, wincing as the movement sent a jolt of pain through his injured leg. "Hurt? Of course, but I'm not sure what the police need to know about a shark attack." Larson's expression remained neutral. It's standard procedure for any serious injury incident, especially one that gets media attention. And believe it or not, we occasionally get people who fake shark attacks for insurance purposes or attention. "Fake?" Tyler asked incredulously. "Who would fake something like this?" "You'd be surprised," Larson replied, not elaborating further. "Can you walk me through what happened that morning? Start from when you arrived at the beach." Tyler recounted the events as clearly as he could remember them. Kai's warning, the red flag that went up after he was already in the water, his decision to catch one more wave despite the evacuation order, and then the terrifying sequence of the attack itself. Larson took notes, interrupting occasionally with clarifying questions. When Tyler finished, the detective reviewed his notes before asking, "And you're certain it was a tiger shark? Not another species?" "Absolutely," Tyler said without hesitation. "I've been surfing for over 15 years, including in shark-heavy areas like South Africa and Australia. It was a tiger shark, one of the largest I've ever seen or heard about. The coloration and pattern were unmistakable, even in that split second before it hit my board." "And you didn't have a camera with you? No GoPro or anything mounted on your board or person?" Tyler shook his head, feeling a twinge of regret. "No, I was just out for a morning session. I wasn't filming." "And your board?" "Destroyed," Tyler said, the loss of his custom-shaped board a minor but real grief compared to his other injuries. "The shark bit through it like it was nothing. The lifeguard said they recovered some pieces, but it was basically shattered." Larson nodded, making another note. "We'll need a formal statement once you're feeling better, but this helps for now. The Department of Land and Natural Resources is handling the wildlife aspect of the investigation, but we coordinate with them on all incidents like this." As the detective stood to leave, Tyler found himself asking, "Do you get many shark attacks here on Kauai, I mean?" Larson paused at the door. "Fewer than you might think. Given how many people are in the water every day, Hawaii averages only about 3 or 4 attacks per year across all islands, and many of those are just bites, not the kind of sustained attack you experienced. He seemed to consider something before adding, "You were extremely lucky, Mr. Morgan. I've investigated 2 fatalities in my 12 years on the force. Both were in remote areas with no immediate help available. If those lifeguards hadn't reached you as quickly as they did." He left the sentence unfinished, but Tyler understood. He'd come within minutes, perhaps seconds, of becoming a very different kind of statistic. "Thank you, Detective," Tyler said, suddenly feeling exhausted by the conversation and the memories it had stirred up. "Rest up," Larson replied. "And when you're back on your feet," he caught himself and had the grace to look momentarily embarrassed by the unfortunate phrasing. "When you're recovered, remember to respect those warning flags. They're there for a reason." It was advice Tyler had heard before and ignored. This time he knew would be different. A week after the attack, Tyler was released from the hospital with a comprehensive set of care instructions, prescriptions for pain management and antibiotics, and appointments for follow-up care with both the surgical team and a physical therapist. The medical bills were staggering, even with his basic health insurance, and he knew that his recovery would take months, not weeks. His apartment in Princeville, a small studio in a complex favored by seasonal workers and long-term tourists, seemed smaller and shabbier than he remembered. Using the crutches he'd been issued was challenging in the confined space, and the bathroom was particularly difficult to navigate. But it was home, at least for now, and Tyler was grateful to be out of the hospital. His phone had been inundated with messages and calls from friends around the world who had seen the news, from his former colleagues at surf shops and dive operations in California, Mexico, and Indonesia, from his ex-girlfriend Leilani, and even from several surf publications wanting exclusive interviews. The attention was overwhelming, and Tyler found not entirely welcome. He'd always been a private person, despite his sociable nature, and the thought of rehashing the most terrifying experience of his life for public consumption made him deeply uncomfortable. Still, when Ryan Kealoha, a respected local journalist for the Garden Island newspaper, contacted him about an interview, Tyler agreed. Ryan had covered the surfing community with integrity for years, and Tyler felt he owed it to the local people to share his story as a cautionary tale, if nothing else. They met at a small coffee shop in Hanalei, not far from where the attack had occurred. Tyler maneuvered his crutches awkwardly through the door, self-conscious about the stares from other patrons who recognized him from the local news coverage. Ryan, a third-generation Hawaiian with an easy smile and thoughtful eyes, had secured a table in the corner that allowed Tyler to prop his injured leg on an empty chair. "I appreciate you meeting with me," Ryan said after they'd ordered drinks. "I know you've probably been bombarded with interview requests." Tyler nodded, adjusting his position to minimize the throbbing pain that was his constant companion despite the medication. "It's been intense, but I figured if I'm going to talk to anyone, it should be someone who understands the local perspective." Ryan took out a small recorder and placed it on the table between them. "Mind if I record our conversation? It helps me make sure I quote you accurately." "That's fine," Tyler agreed, though he felt a flutter of anxiety at the thought of his words being preserved and potentially shared beyond the newspaper article. For the next hour, Tyler recounted his experience in detail from the moment he arrived at the beach to his rescue and recovery. Ryan was a skilled interviewer, asking thoughtful questions without sensationalizing the incident. When they reached the topic of the shark itself, Ryan's interest seemed to sharpen. "There have been rumors circulating about the size of the shark," he said, consulting his notes. "Some reports are calling it a monster or mega shark, claiming it was over 20 feet long. Can you clarify what you saw?" Tyler frowned, troubled by the exaggeration. "It was big, probably around 15 feet, which is definitely large for a tiger shark. But I never said anything about 20 feet or a monster. It was just a shark doing what sharks do. I was in its territory, not the other way around." Ryan nodded, making a note. "That matches what the lifeguards reported. There's been some sensationalism in certain mainland coverage." "Great," Tyler said with a grimace. "Just what I need to be known as the guy who got attacked by the monster shark of Kauai." "Which brings me to my next question," Ryan continued. "The DLNR has been tracking tiger shark movements around the island since the attack. They've spotted several large tigers, but none that match the size description of the one that Attacked you. Do you think it's still in the area? The question brought back the visceral memory of the massive shadow moving beneath him with such purpose and power. Tyler suppressed a shudder. I have no idea. Sharks are constantly moving, following food sources. It could be miles away by now. The beaches reopened yesterday, Ryan noted. Some local business owners were pushing for it to happen sooner, given the impact on tourism. How do you feel about that decision? Tyler considered the question carefully. His first instinct was to say it was too soon, that the risk was still too high. But he recognized that reaction as coming from his personal trauma, not from objective risk assessment. The authorities know what they're doing, he said finally. Shark attacks are incredibly rare, even here. Keeping people out of the water for a week was probably excessive from a pure risk perspective, but I understand why they did it. If someone else had been hurt right after me, the backlash would have been intense. As their conversation wound down, Ryan asked the question Tyler had been expecting from the beginning. Will you surf again? It was something Tyler had been asking himself during the long, painful nights in the hospital. Surfing had been the center of his life for as long as he could remember, not just a sport, but an identity, a community, a relationship with the natural world. The attack had shattered not just his board and his leg, but something fundamental in that relationship. I don't know, he admitted, surprising himself with his honesty. Right now, the thought of being back in deep water makes me... He trailed off, unwilling to use the word afraid, even though it was accurate. But I can't imagine my life without surfing either. So I guess the real answer is that I'll have to find out when my leg heals enough to try. Ryan turned off the recorder, signaling the official end of the interview. As he put it away, he said more casually, "Off the record, there's been some talk among the old-timers about the shark. Some of them believe it's a specific tiger they call Calais, the Wanderer, that's been spotted around the islands for decades. There are stories about it going back to the 1980s. Tyler raised an eyebrow. You're saying the shark that attacked me is 40 years old. Tiger sharks can live to be 50 or 60, Ryan pointed out, and they continue to grow throughout their lives, which would explain the exceptional size. The traditional Hawaiian relationship with sharks is complex. They're seen as both dangers and potential ancestral guardians, aumakua. Some families believe their ancestors return as sharks to protect them. I don't think this one was feeling very protective, Tyler said dryly. Ryan smiled. No, probably not. But I thought you might find it interesting that the shark might have its own story, its own history in these waters. The thought was oddly comforting, that the creature that had nearly killed him wasn't just a mindless predator, but a being with its own long journey through the same waters Tyler had come to love. It didn't diminish the trauma of the attack, but it placed it in a larger context that somehow made it easier to process. Thanks for sharing that, Tyler said. It does help in a weird way. As they parted, Ryan promised to send Tyler a copy of the article before it went to print, an offer Tyler appreciated. The conversation had been cathartic in a way his discussions with medical professionals and police hadn't been, allowing him to process the event as a story with meaning rather than just a random accident or the result of his own recklessness. The article appeared 3 days later, taking up most of the front page of the Garden Island with the headline, "Surfer recounts harrowing tiger shark attack in Hanalei Bay." Ryan had been true to his word, presenting Tyler's experience with accuracy and respect, emphasizing the rarity of such attacks and the importance of heeding safety warnings without sensationalizing the incident or demonizing the shark. The response was immediate and varied. Tyler received dozens of messages from locals thanking him for his balanced perspective and wishing him a speedy recovery. Several surf shop owners offered him replacement boards at cost or even for free, gestures of solidarity from the tight-knit surfing community. But there were other reactions as well. Several mainland news outlets picked up the story, often reframing it with more sensational headlines. "Monster Shark Terrorizes Hawaiian Paradise," or "Surfer's Death-Defying Battle with Killer Tiger Shark." These versions emphasize the danger and drama while minimizing the context and complexity that Ryan had so carefully included. And then there were the skeptics. Internet comments on the news stories included people questioning the size of the shark, suggesting Tyler was exaggerating for attention or even implying that the whole incident was somehow fabricated. The lack of photographic evidence beyond the medical records of Tyler's injuries and the recovered pieces of his surfboard left room for doubt among those inclined to disbelieve. The worst came when a popular cryptozoology podcast featured Tyler's attack in an episode about unusually large marine predators, linking it to myths about prehistoric megalodon sharks surviving in deep ocean trenches. The host speculated that Tyler might have encountered something science can't explain, twisting his account into something unrecognizable and absurd. Tyler found himself increasingly frustrated and withdrawn as these distortions spread. What had been a profound, life-altering encounter with a natural predator in its own environment was being transformed into entertainment, conspiracy fodder, or ammunition in ongoing debates about shark conservation versus human safety. 2 weeks after the attack, as Tyler was beginning his physical therapy at a rehabilitation center in Lee, he received an unexpected call from Detective Larson. "Mr. Morgan," Larson's voice came through the phone with the slight delay common to cell service on parts of the island. "I wanted to update you on some developments related to your case." "My case?" Tyler repeated, surprised that the police were still involved. "I thought the investigation was closed." "The initial incident report is complete," Larson confirmed. "But we've been monitoring the response to the news coverage, and there's something you should be aware of." Tyler felt a flutter of anxiety. "What's going on?" "We've received reports of individuals specifically coming to Hanalei Bay, hoping to spot or even photograph the monster shark from the attack. Some are even bringing boats with underwater cameras and drones." "You've got to be kidding me," Tyler said, dismayed by the thrill-seeking behavior. "I wish I were," Larson replied. "The DLNR is concerned that this activity could disrupt normal shark behavior or even provoke an aggressive response if people start trying to bait the water to attract sharks for photos." Tyler ran a hand through his hair, frustration mounting. "What does this have to do with me? I never called it a monster shark. I've been very clear about what happened." "I know," Larson assured him. "That's why I'm calling. The department is working with the DLNR on a public statement to discourage this behavior, and we were hoping you might be willing to participate. A first-hand account from the actual victim, emphasizing the serious nature of shark encounters, might help counteract some of the sensationalism." Tyler's initial instinct was to refuse. He'd had enough of public attention and just wanted to focus on his recovery. But the thought of thrill-seekers potentially provoking another attack, one that might not end with the victim surviving, made the decision for him. "I'll do it," he said finally. "Whatever helps prevent anyone else from going through this." Larson thanked him and promised to be in touch with details for a press conference later that week. After the call ended, Tyler sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the complex pattern of scars emerging from beneath the bandages on his leg. The wounds were healing well according to his doctors, but they would leave permanent marks. Raised whitish lines across his calf and thigh, a lifelong reminder of his encounter with the tiger shark. In some ways, Tyler was grateful for the physical scars. They were tangible evidence of what he'd experienced, proof against the doubters and conspiracy theorists, but the psychological impact was proving harder to quantify or display. He hadn't been back to the ocean since the attack, not even to sit on the beach and watch the waves. The thought of the vast blue depth, of what moved unseen beneath the surface, now triggered an instinctive fear that no amount of rational thought seemed able to overcome. This was the reality he now lived with, a reality that couldn't be captured in sensational headlines or podcast speculations. It wasn't a story of a monster shark or a heroic battle for survival. It was simply the story of a man who had stayed in the water too long and encountered one of nature's perfect predators, and who was now trying to find his way back to a life forever altered by those few terrifying moments. The press conference took place on the beach at Hanalei Bay, deliberately scheduled for early morning, when the lighting would be less dramatic and the crowd of onlookers minimized. Tyler arrived on his crutches, accompanied by Makoa, the senior lifeguard who had helped rescue him, and Dr. Laura Kiloha, a marine biologist with the DLNR who specialized in shark behavior. A small podium had been set up near the lifeguard stand, with the bay's perfect crescent and blue waters providing a scenic but now ominous backdrop. Several local news crews were present, along with a handful of reporters from Honolulu and a single camera team from a mainland cable news channel. Tyler spotted Ryan from the Garden Island among the press contingent and nodded in recognition. Detective Larson handled the introductions, keeping them brief and professional. Dr. Kialoha spoke first. providing context about tiger shark behavior, their importance to the marine ecosystem, and the statistical rarity of attacks. Tiger sharks, or Galeocerdo cuvier, are natural inhabitants of Hawaiian waters, she explained, her voice calm and authoritative. They typically feed on fish, turtles, seals, and other marine life. Human attacks are exceedingly rare and almost never predatory in nature. Most often, they are cases of mistaken identity or exploratory bites, where the shark is investigating an unfamiliar object in its environment. She went on to explain the tracking efforts that had been underway since the attack, confirming that several large tiger sharks had been identified in the waters around Kauai, including 2 in the 15-foot range that could potentially have been responsible for the attack on Tyler. These animals are not monsters or villains, Dr. Kealoha emphasized. They are wild predators behaving as their biology dictates in their natural habitat. Our goal is not to eliminate them, but to understand their movements and behaviors to minimize the risk of negative interactions with humans. When it was Tyler's turn to speak, he found himself unexpectedly nervous. He'd prepared some brief remarks with Larson's help, focusing on ocean safety and his decision to ignore warnings, but standing before the cameras with his injured leg, throbbing beneath its bandages, he found himself deviating from the script. "I've spent most of my adult life in the ocean," he began, his voice betraying more emotion than he'd intended. "I've surfed in some of the world's most beautiful and dangerous spots, and I've always prided myself on understanding and respecting the water. But on the day of the attack, I made a choice that nearly cost me my life. I ignored direct warnings from people who knew better than I did about the conditions that day." He paused, looking out over the bay where it had happened, forcing himself to confront the beauty that now contained such menace for him. "The shark that attacked me was doing exactly what sharks have evolved to do over millions of years. I was the intruder in its world, not the other way around. There was nothing malicious or evil about what happened. It was simply nature being nature, and me being foolish enough to think the rules didn't apply to me." Tyler shifted his weight on his crutches, wincing slightly as the movement sent a jolt of pain through his leg. "I've seen some of the stories circulating online about a monster shark or some kind of unusually aggressive predator in these waters. I want to be absolutely clear. What attacked me was a large tiger shark. Nothing more and nothing less. It wasn't a sea monster or a megalodon or anything other than a normal predator in its natural environment." He looked directly into the cameras now, his expression serious. "If you're coming to Hanalei Bay hoping to spot or photograph this shark, you're not only putting yourself at risk, but potentially creating conditions that could lead to another attack. And I can tell you from personal experience, you do not want to be on the receiving end of a tiger shark's attention." Tyler finished by thanking the lifeguards, medical team, and local authorities who had responded so quickly and efficiently to the attack, acknowledging that without their intervention, he would likely not have survived. As he stepped back from the podium, leaning heavily on his crutches, he felt a strange sense of closure. Not that the trauma was behind him, but that he had at least reclaimed some control over the narrative of what had happened to him. The questions from the press were predictably focused on the most dramatic aspects of the attack. How large was the shark exactly? Did Tyler think it had specifically targeted him? Would he ever surf again? But Dr. Kealoha skillfully redirected the more sensationalistic inquiries towards scientific facts, and Detective Larson maintained firm control over the flow of the press conference, ending it after just 20 minutes. As the cameras were being packed away and the small crowd began to disperse, Tyler found himself standing at the edge of the beach, looking out over the water. The waves were small today, gentle rollers that barely qualified as surfable. A few early morning swimmers were visible near the pier, seemingly unconcerned about what might be lurking beneath the surface. "It gets easier," a voice said beside him, and Tyler turned to find Makoa, the lifeguard, watching him with understanding in his eyes. "The fear?" Tyler asked. Makoa nodded. "I was bitten by a small reef shark when I was 19. Nothing like what you experienced. Just a mistaken nibble on my foot while I was spearfishing. But I couldn't get back in the water for months afterward. Every dark shape, every piece of seaweed brushing against my leg would send me into a panic." "How did you get past it?" Tyler asked, genuinely curious. "Time," Makoa said simply. "And not forcing it. The ocean has been here for billions of years. It can wait for you to be ready." Tyler appreciated the lack of pressure in the lifeguard's advice. Everyone from his physical therapist to well-meaning friends had been encouraging him to get back on the horse, to visit the beach, to put his feet in the water, to begin reclaiming his relationship with the ocean. But none of them had experienced what he had, felt what he had felt as those massive jaws closed around his leg. "Thank you," Tyler said, "for the advice and for saving my life that day." Makoa shrugged, uncomfortable with the gratitude. "Just doing my job. But maybe next time you'll listen when we tell you to get out of the water, yeah?" Tyler managed a small smile. "Definitely. Lesson learned." As Makoa walked away, Tyler remained at the edge of the beach, watching the gentle morning waves rolling in. For the first time since the attack, he allowed himself to really look at the ocean, to engage with it visually rather than turning away from it as he'd been doing. The fear was still there, a tight knot in his chest, but alongside it was something else, a recognition of loss, of something precious that had been taken from him. Surfing had been more than a sport or hobby for Tyler. It had been his connection to something larger than himself, a way of being in the world that defined him. Without it, he wasn't sure who he was anymore. The realization brought unexpected tears to his eyes, and he blinked them away quickly, self-conscious despite the fact that the press and onlookers had mostly departed. As he turned to make his way back to where he'd parked his car, Tyler caught movement in his peripheral vision, something large breaking the surface of the water, perhaps 100 yards offshore. His heart rate instantly accelerated, his body flooding with adrenaline before his mind could process what he was seeing. It was a turtle, a large green sea turtle coming up for air before descending again into the blue depths. The relief was so intense it made him lightheaded, and Tyler found himself laughing softly at his own reaction. The ocean was full of life, most of it completely harmless to humans. He couldn't let one traumatic experience redefine his entire relationship with the natural world. That realization, small but significant, felt like the first real step in his recovery. In the months that followed, Tyler's physical healing progressed more rapidly than his emotional recovery. The surgical repairs to his leg were successful, and his dedicated adherence to the physical therapy regimen had his doctors optimistic about a near-complete return of function. The scars remained dramatic, a pattern of curved lines that mapped the shape of the shark's jaw across his calf and lower thigh, but the pain gradually subsided from constant companion to occasional visitor. His life changed in other ways as well. Unable to return to his physically demanding job at the dive shop while recovering, Tyler had initially worried about making ends meet. But the coverage of his attack had led to unexpected opportunities. A wetsuit company specializing in shark-resistant materials approached him about becoming a brand ambassador, an irony not lost on Tyler or his friends. He turned them down, uncomfortable with the implied fear-mongering of their marketing approach. Instead, he accepted a position with the Kauai Ocean Safety Bureau, developing educational materials about marine hazards and safe ocean practices. The role was part-time and desk-bound, but it allowed him to use his extensive ocean experience in a positive way while he continued his recovery. It also gave him a new perspective on the island's relationship with its surrounding waters, not just as a playground for tourists and surfers, but as a complex ecosystem that demanded respect and understanding. Tyler had not returned to surfing. He had progressed from avoiding the beach entirely to being able to sit on the sand and watch others enjoying the waves. Occasionally, he would wade into the shallows, never going deeper than his knees, feeling the familiar pull and push of the water against his legs. Each small step was a victory against the fear that still ambushed him in unguarded moments, in dreams where he felt again the incomprehensible pressure of the shark's jaws, or in sudden panics when swimming pools grew too deep, triggering memories of the vast open water beneath him during the attack. It was during one of his regular visits to Dr. Patel for a follow-up examination that Tyler first articulated a question that had been forming in his mind for weeks. "Do you treat many shark attack survivors?" he asked, as she examined the healing scars on his leg. Dr. Patel glanced up, her hands pausing in their careful assessment. "You're actually the first in my 15 years practicing here on Kauai. I've dealt with plenty of other ocean injuries, coral cuts, jellyfish stings, boat propeller accidents, but shark attacks are exceedingly rare." "That's what everyone keeps telling me," Tyler said, "but it doesn't really help with the nightmares." Dr. Patel straightened up, regarding him thoughtfully. "The physical trauma is healing well," she said, But have you considered talking to someone about the psychological impact? There's no shame in seeking help for post-traumatic stress, which is essentially what you're experiencing. Tyler had considered it, but had been reluctant to take that step. Part of him felt he didn't deserve support, that his injuries were the direct result of his own poor decision to ignore safety warnings. But hearing the suggestion from Dr. Patel, delivered with professional concern rather than judgment, made it harder to dismiss. "I wouldn't even know where to start," he admitted. "Start by acknowledging that what you experienced was genuinely traumatic," Dr. Patel said, making a note in his chart. "Your brain and body went through an extreme stress event, and there are physical and neurological consequences to that kind of experience that go beyond the obvious injuries." She recommended a therapist who specialized in trauma and phobias, someone who had worked successfully with survivors of various life-threatening events. Tyler took the referral information, making no promises but feeling a small sense of relief at having the option. As summer turned to fall, bringing slightly cooler temperatures and the gradual transition to Kauai's wetter season, Tyler found himself becoming increasingly restless. His leg was healed enough for most normal activities, though certain movements still caused discomfort. He had established a new routine, a new life that accommodated his changed relationship with the ocean. But there was something missing, a hollow space where his passion for surfing had been. He began spending more time at the small boat harbor in Hanalei, watching the local fishermen and tour operators prepare their vessels. The familiarity of the environment, the smells of diesel and salt air, the rhythmic slap of water against hulls, the coarse texture of dock lines, awakened something in him. It was a way to be connected to the ocean without the vulnerability of being immersed in it. One afternoon, as Tyler sat on a bench watching the activity around the harbor, Kai appeared beside him, carrying fishing gear and a small cooler. The old Hawaiian man had become something of a friend in the months since the attack, checking in on Tyler periodically and sharing stories of his decades on and around the water. "You look like a man who needs to get wet," Kai said without preamble, setting down his gear. Tyler smiled ruefully. "That obvious, huh?" "Fisherman knows another fisherman," Kai replied cryptically, "even if he doesn't have a pole in his hand. You coming with me today, or just going to sit here looking sorry for yourself?" The direct challenge, delivered with Kai's characteristic bluntness, caught Tyler off guard. "Coming with you on your boat, unless you want to swim alongside," Kai said, already moving toward a small but well-maintained center console boat tied up nearby. "I'm going out to check my traps. Could use an extra hand." Tyler hesitated, his heart rate accelerating at the thought of being out on the open water. "I don't know if I'm ready for that." Kai paused, turning back to look at Tyler with an expression that held no pity, only a straightforward assessment. "Ready or not, the fish are biting, and I'm going. You can come or you can stay. Your choice." Put that way, the decision seemed simpler. Tyler stood testing his weight on his injured leg, and then followed Kai to the boat. The old man offered no help as Tyler awkwardly maneuvered himself aboard, respecting his independence, or perhaps forcing him to overcome his own limitations. Once they were underway, the small boat cutting through the calm waters of the bay, Tyler found his anxiety beginning to subside. Being on the water was different from being in it. He felt a sense of control and security that had been absent from his few attempts to return to swimming. Kai navigated with the confidence of someone who knew these waters intimately, following mental markers to locate his traps. They worked in comfortable silence, Tyler helping to pull up the wire cages that contained a modest catch of local crabs and fish. The physical activity felt good, using muscles that had weakened during his recovery, and the simple, purposeful tasks kept his mind from wandering to darker places. It was as they were checking the last trap, located in deeper water just beyond the mouth of the bay, that Kai suddenly pointed toward the horizon. "There, you see it?" Tyler followed his gesture, squinting against the afternoon sun reflecting off the water. A dark fin broke the surface perhaps 50 yards away, cutting a smooth line through the water before disappearing again. Tyler's breath caught in his throat, his body tensing instinctively. But there was something different about this fin, more curved and proportionally smaller than a shark's dorsal fin. "Spinner dolphin," Kai confirmed, noting Tyler's recognition. "They like this channel. Good feeding here." As if on cue, a dolphin launched itself from the water, performing a perfect spinning leap before re-entering the surface with barely a splash. It was joined by others, a small pod of perhaps 6 or 7 animals. their playful movements a stark contrast to the methodical, purposeful swimming of sharks. Tyler watched them, mesmerized by their obvious joy in movement, in the water, in simply being alive in this perfect environment. For a moment, he remembered what it had felt like to experience that same joy, the feeling of catching a perfect wave, of being in harmony with the ocean rather than at odds with it. Beautiful. Yeah? Kai said, his weathered face softening as he watched the dolphins. Yeah, Tyler agreed quietly. Beautiful. They stayed watching until the pod moved on, disappearing toward the open ocean. As Kai turned the boat back toward the harbor, Tyler found himself asking, "Do you ever worry about what's in the water when you're out here every day?" Kai considered the question, his hands steady on the wheel. "Respect is not worry," he said finally. "I respect the ocean, the weather, the creatures, but worry does nothing but make your belly hurt and your head noisy." It was simple wisdom, delivered without pretension, and it resonated with Tyler more deeply than all the well-meaning advice he'd received from friends and medical professionals in the months since the attack. "When did you know you were ready to come back?" Tyler asked. "After your accident." Kai had told him about a near-drowning experience in his youth, when a sudden storm had capsized his father's fishing boat. "When staying away hurt more than the fear of returning," Kai said, his eyes on the approaching harbor. "Fear is like a fishhook. The more you pull against it, the deeper it digs. Sometimes you have to swim toward it to get free." Tyler absorbed this, watching as the familiar shoreline of Hanalei came into clearer view. The experience on the boat had been unexpectedly healing. Not a dramatic breakthrough, but a quiet reminder that his relationship with the ocean didn't have to be all or nothing, surfer or exile. There were other ways to reconnect, to rebuild what had been damaged by those few terrifying moments with the tiger shark. As they tied up at the dock and unloaded their modest catch, Tyler felt a sense of accomplishment that had been missing from his life in recent months. It wasn't the adrenaline rush of catching a perfect wave, but it was connection to the water, to the island, to a tradition of respectful coexistence with the natural world that had existed on Kauai for centuries before tourism and surfing became economic drivers. "Same time Thursday?" Kai asked as they parted, making it sound more like a statement than a question. Tyler nodded, recognizing the invitation as the gift it was, not just a fishing trip but a path forward, a way to heal that honored both his fear and his love of the ocean. "I'll be here," he promised, and for the first time in months, found himself looking forward to returning to the water. On a clear morning, almost exactly 1 year after the attack, Tyler stood at the edge of Hanalei Bay, a surfboard tucked under his arm. It wasn't his old board. That had been destroyed by the tiger shark's powerful jaws, but a new one, slightly larger and more buoyant to accommodate the lingering weakness in his left leg. The scars had faded from angry red to silvery white, still dramatic against his tanned skin, but no longer the first thing people noticed about him. The beach was busy with the usual mix of tourists and locals. Children built sandcastles near the water's edge while their parents watched from beach chairs. A group of beginners received instructions from a surf school instructor, practicing pop-ups on the sand before attempting them in the gentle shore break. Further out, beyond where the waves were breaking, a few experienced surfers waited patiently for the right set. Tyler's heart beat faster as he watched them, a complex mixture of longing and apprehension tightening his chest. He had been preparing for this moment for months, first on Kai's fishing boat, then gradually progressing to swimming in the protected waters of Lydgate Park on the eastern side of the island, where a rock wall created a safe lagoon, free from large marine predators. He'd even tried paddleboarding in Hanalei Bay itself, staying close to shore and in the company of others. But this, returning to surfing in the open waters where he'd been attacked, was different. This was facing the specific fear that had haunted his dreams for a year. "You don't have to do this today," a voice said beside him, and Tyler turned to find Leilani, his ex-girlfriend, watching him with concern in her dark eyes. Their relationship had found its way to an unexpected second chance in the months after the attack. Tyler's brush with death had put many things in perspective, including the cultural differences that had created tension between them before. Leilani's family, initially resistant to their daughter dating a mainland haole, had softened somewhat. After seeing Tyler's respect for local customs and his determination to recover not just physically, but emotionally from his traumatic experience. "I know," Tyler said, his eyes returning to the water. "But if not today, then when?" It was a fair question. The conditions were ideal. Small, clean waves, good visibility, plenty of other people in the water. The shark monitoring program implemented after his attack had shown no recent sightings of large tigers in the bay. If there was ever a safe time to return to surfing here, this was it. "Just stay with the group," Leilani reminded him, referring to the loose cluster of surfers already in the lineup. "And if it doesn't feel right, there's no shame in coming. Back in." Tyler nodded, adjusting the leash around his ankle, his right one now, as his left ankle still occasionally swelled after extended activity. The familiar routine of preparation brought a sense of calm muscle memory taking over as he waxed the deck of his board with careful, methodical strokes. What he was about to do wasn't about proving anything to others. The media interest in his story had faded months ago, and most of the tourists on the beach today probably had no idea who he was or what had happened to him in these waters. This was about reclaiming something essential to his identity, about refusing to let one traumatic event, however life-altering, define the rest of his life. "I'll be watching," Leilani promised, stepping back to give him space. Tyler took a deep breath, feeling the warm Hawaiian air fill his lungs, and began walking toward the water. The first touch of the ocean against his feet sent a jolt of awareness through him, his body remembering even if his mind was ready to move forward. He pushed through it, wading deeper until he could lay his board on the surface and begin the familiar motion of paddling. The rhythmic movement felt like coming home. His arms, dipping into the water, his body balanced on the board, the gentle rise and fall as he navigated over small swells. He kept his focus narrow at first, watching his hands enter the water, concentrating on his breathing, not allowing his mind to wander to what might be beneath him. As he approached the lineup of waiting surfers, several faces turned toward him, with recognition and encouragement. Many were locals who knew his story. Some had even been part of the search effort to track the shark after the attack. Their nods and quiet greetings carried no pressure or expectation, only acknowledgement of the significance of what he was doing. Tyler positioned himself at the edge of the group, turning his board to face the horizon where the waves were forming. The water here was deeper, perhaps 15 feet, clear enough that he could see the sandy bottom in patches, but with enough blue depth to harbor hidden presence. He forced himself to stay present, to focus on the immediate sensations, the sun on his back, the gentle rocking of his board, the distant sound of children playing on the beach. The first wave that came his way was small, barely worth the effort of catching. But Tyler turned his board, paddled with the gathering swell, and felt the familiar surge as the wave caught him. He popped up to his feet, his injured leg protesting slightly but holding firm as he made the drop, and began a gentle traverse across the wave face. It was a short ride, the wave petering out before he could really get going, but it didn't matter. He'd done it. He'd stood up on a wave in Hanalei Bay in the same waters where the tiger shark had nearly taken his life a year earlier. As he slid off the back of the dissipating wave and began paddling back out, Tyler felt a surge of emotion. That threatened to overwhelm him. Not fear this time, but a complex mixture of grief, triumph, and something like reconciliation. He caught 2 more waves over the next hour, each ride a little longer, a little more confident than the last. The familiar joy of surfing began to reassert itself, moments when his focus narrowed to just the wave and his body's response to it, when the fear receded completely. They were brief moments, interrupted whenever his awareness returned to the depth beneath him or a shadow passed too close to his board, but they were real, hints of his old relationship with the ocean, damaged but not destroyed by trauma. As he paddled back after his 3rd wave, Tyler found himself slightly separated from the main group, in a quieter patch of water with greater visibility. He stopped paddling for a moment, sitting up on his board to rest his arms, and that's when he saw it. A distinctive shape moving through the water perhaps 30 yards away, its powerful tail propelling it forward with effortless grace. A tiger shark, not as large as the one that had attacked him, perhaps 10 or 11 feet rather than 15, but unmistakable in its patterned coloration and purposeful movement. Tyler's heart rate doubled instantly, adrenaline flooding his system as his body prepared instinctively for fight or flight. But something unexpected happened as he watched the shark glide through the water. apparently uninterested in the humans scattered across its domain. Instead of panic, Tyler felt a strange sense of awe. The tiger shark wasn't a monster or a villain. It was a perfectly evolved predator, a necessary part of the ocean ecosystem, a being doing exactly what it was designed to do in the environment. It had occupied for millions of years before humans ever entered the water for pleasure. Tyler remained frozen on his board, watching as the shark continued on its path, neither approaching nor fleeing from the scattered surfers, most of whom were unaware of its presence. After perhaps 30 seconds, it angled toward deeper water and descended, its form becoming increasingly indistinct until it disappeared entirely into the blue depth. Only then did Tyler release the breath he hadn't realized he was holding. His hands were shaking, and his injured leg throbbed with remembered pain, but he hadn't panicked. He hadn't screamed or thrashed or done any of the things that might have attracted the shark's predatory attention. He had simply coexisted, briefly, and from a safe distance, with the type of creature that had nearly ended his life. It wasn't forgiveness. That implied a moral dimension that had no place in his encounter with a wild predator. It wasn't fearlessness. He was already paddling slowly but deliberately toward the shore, unwilling to push his luck further today. But it was something like acceptance and recognition that the ocean and its inhabitants weren't malevolent forces arrayed against him, but simply different kinds of beings sharing the same vast environment, each with their own nature and purpose. As Tyler's board touched the sand and he stepped onto the beach, Leilani was waiting, her expression questioning as she took in his thoughtful demeanor. "How was it?" she asked, helping him carry his board up beyond the tide line. Tyler considered the question, looking back at the bay where both trauma and healing had found him. "It was—" He paused, searching for the right words. "It was the ocean, beautiful and dangerous and exactly what it's always been." Leilani seemed to understand what he wasn't saying directly. "And will you go out again?" Tyler nodded slowly, certain of his answer, despite the lingering fear that he knew would never entirely leave him. "Yes, not today, and maybe not tomorrow, but yes." As they turned to walk up the beach, Tyler cast one last glance at the water, at the perfect waves, continuing to roll in with timeless rhythm, at the place where the shark had disappeared into the deep. The scarred tissue of his leg pulled slightly as he walked, a permanent reminder of what had happened and what had nearly been lost. But alongside the scars was something else, something less visible, but equally permanent, a deeper understanding of his place in the natural world, neither master nor victim but participant, with all the wonder and risk that entailed. It was an understanding that had come at great cost, but that he wouldn't trade, even if he could erase the physical reminders of that day a year ago when a tiger shark had changed his life forever. The ocean remained what it had always been, vast, powerful, indifferent to human desires or fears, and somewhere beneath its surface, the great tiger shark that had attacked him continued its solitary journey through Hawaiian waters, neither villain nor monster, but simply shark, doing what sharks had done for countless millennia before humans ever ventured into their domain. That thought, strangely, brought Tyler comfort as he walked away from the water, not in retreat, but in respect, already planning when he would return, knowing that he would carry both caution and wonder with him when he did.